All right, hello everyone. I'm Lonnie with Untitled Nerd Network, brought to you by Infinity Flux out of Hickson, Tennessee, who I actually finally went and saw. I know I was going to do it all weekend, but they're set up over there against the bleachers here at Metrotham Con the final day. And I'm here with the kind of, I guess, the heart of the creative team of X-Men the Animated Series. Is this like, would I be safe in assuming that this is probably the first, if not maybe one of the first times you all have been on camera together?
On camera? Yeah, I could say that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Very. Just a couple times before. This is new to us.
History in the making here on Untitled Nerd Network. Okay, so from left to right, I've actually got it set up. We have. I'm going to have you introduce yourselves and let everybody know what you did on the show and kind of a little bit of background.
I'm Mark Edens. We're calling me the head writer, even though it was not an official position. But I wrote maybe more scripts than anybody, certainly at the beginning, and worked on setting up the story arc for the first season and for some of the multi-parters later on. So did a lot of writing for the X-Men.
Hi, my name is Larry Houston. I was the producer-director of the series. I was in charge of art directing and making sure the trains ran on time, and made sure everything followed the Marvel continuity as best we could.
Of course, I'm Lonnie with Untitled Nerd Network.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, I'm Eric Lewald. I was called executive story editor, which who knows what the heck that means. But it meant I was in charge of kind of creating the world that we had for our scripts and supervising all 76 scripts with writers like Mark and the lady to my left here doing the scripts. And so if there's anything about the stories you like or don't like, it's on me.
And I'm Julia Lewald, and I was one of the writers, not the head writer, Mark, just one of the writers on X-Men the Animated Series. I got to write Days of Future Past Part 1 and other scripts, and got to sort of contribute over the 5-year run, different story ideas and things like that, again, over the course of the show.
Awesome. So, I love this opportunity to sit here and pick the minds of the people behind my favorite cartoon. Because this was my favorite cartoon growing up. There's just a million different things. I have to ask, when this became a concept, in the late 80s, we had Pride of the X-Men, and I don't even know if we're going to talk about that or not.
Yeah.
But because I watched it, it was at Blockbuster for a rental, and I was like, hey, this is another X-Men cartoon, and I watched it. And it didn't quite have that same dramatic flair that I was, at that point, I think we're about halfway through season 2 of the animated series. And I said, that's not quite what I like. It just, I don't know, something was off. And even as a kid, even as an adult, I can't quite place that. Any thoughts on?
Well, Larry had a hand in that.
Yeah. Well, I directed that Pride of the X-Men that you're talking about. And back then, it was my boss was Stanley and Margaret Lesh, and she really believed in getting the X-Men on television. And so she found the money from someone to put together a pilot, but we had to have the person who had the money. They made us compromise a lot of ideas that we wanted to do, and so, but we did get a good animation studio overseas. It was Toy Animation. And we did the best we could, but back then there was only 3 networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC. And nobody was interested in the show. And so we did our best back then, but, fast forward about 6 years later, Margaret was in charge of the Fox Kids network. And that's when she said, okay, we're going to put the X-Men on the air. And that's when she called me and Will Menio and Eric and Mark and said, let's do it. And with this writing team, they were able to put together a vastly superior script and formatting for the first 13 episodes. And we're a success because of the writing teams that you see before you right now. And so that's kind of like encapsulating the Pride of the X-Men stuff, And we tried. I mean, I had been trying to get it on the air for like 12 years since I got at Marvel Productions, and it wasn't until 1992 that we actually, got the X-Men on the air. But I had been pushing the X-Men even when I was working on Spider-Man and Amazing Friends. Every time they had an X-Men, so the writers wrote an X-Men section, I said, give me that. I want to draw it, and I want to try and showcase the X-Men as best I could to show, to give a sample to the audience out there and for the network to tell them, look, the X-Men is a great idea. Check us out. And, I did my best.
So here's the thing. The cartoon in itself was good, but the fact that we already had X-Men the Animated Series on Fox, by the time I saw that, it suffered.
Yeah.
Now, if that would have been the only game in town,
Yeah.
I would have been like, oh, X-Men.
Yeah, the Pride of the X-Men was 1986, and the regular series that you guys know was 1992. So it's like a whole 6 years difference between
That it's amazing how much animation changed in that 6 years too.
Oh, yeah.
It had advanced
Yes.
quite a bit, and the series that you guys were a part of borrowed heavily from the the new Jim Lee designs of X-Men. Was that the plan from day one?
Yeah. Basically, what it was is like in the Pride of the X-Men that you saw earlier, the artist at the time was Dave Cockrum, so we based those designs on his artwork. And when we did the 1992 series, Will Mineo and I designed the show based on a Jim Lee, because that was the current artist of the books. And so we took his stylization and made it into the show. But yeah, we were the two art directors that made that decision.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys know before the end of the interview where we're discussing. I'm going to put everybody on the spot, and I'm going to ask for a personal story from the production of this show. Everybody's got a story. I want to hear that. There's got to be some kind of crazy behind the scenes. I don't know if I imagined the writing room and the art room and everything of this show to be like some zany, awesome story to tell every day type thing. But I think I'm imagining the creation of this cartoon far different from what really happened.
Do you want to talk about our dining room table?
Yeah, going into the Wayback Machine, Eric got the call in February '92 that this show was, the big meeting for the show was happening the next morning, and Fox wanted him to be in there to talk about the development for the series. And in '92, in the early evening hours, there was no internet for you to go online and look up and go, who are the X-Men? What are the X-Men? Libraries were closed at that hour. Comic book shops were closed at that hour.
That was before things were 24 hours.
Before things were 24 hours, before information was 24 hours, before access was 24 hours. And when you got the call and you went in and came back, it was you and Mark Edens basically sitting down at our dining room table with notepads and one of the board game, not the board game, you remember the name, and just learning the X-Men on the fly and developing the show with paper and pencil on our dining room table, assuming you'd only have 13 episodes, because that's all the faith they had in the show.
Right. Yeah. So that was our elaborate writers' room, and a lot of tea, a lot of iced tea and Diet Coke went by the boards while we figured that out. But we really depended on people like Larry, who knew the X-Men backwards and forwards. It just had grown up with them and had read every comic. And our attitude was, Mark and my attitude was, we have 8 or 9 really interesting characters here, and we're going to focus on telling individual character stories. And we will rely, and as we build them, we will pull things from the Marvel Universe. And there was a wonderful book that Larry gave us a copy of, Marvel Universe 1988, that showed who everybody was, what their relationships were, what their powers were, who they loved, who they hated. So we pulled from that rather than, say, adapting individual episodes, and just thought, what is the strongest rogue story we could tell? Well, she's miserable because she's lonely. Would she be up for a cure if there was one? So when we did the cure in that first season, that we thought that's a strong rogue moment. Wolverine is afraid of his anger. So we had a moment where he just can't take it anymore. He goes off by himself and tries to get away from his nature and finds out that he can't. So we started with the characters and then built the stories that we had with bits and pieces from what we could get from Larry, from other people that knew the books, from Marvel, who we'd help out with a phone call. But they were 3,000 miles away at Marvel in New York. They were busy making their comic books. They would get us information, but it would tend to be 4 or 5 days later because they were so jammed. And so we kind of ended up doing it on our own with people like Larry, who knew the characters backwards and forwards.
I want to ask the episode The Cure. Who was the creative mind behind that?
Us two, and then I think I'm trying to think who. I'm not sure who we assigned it to. I think you wrote. There was kind of two parts. Was one called The Cure that you wrote, and there was a second part where it gets resolved.
Come the apocalypse.
Come the apocalypse, right? Because whatever was set up in The Cure, and then at the very end of The Cure, oh my God, it's not what we thought it was. It's really this villainous thing. And so that was really an unnamed two-parter. But yeah, we set it up and handed the second part to, I can't remember, but yeah.
I'm focusing on you now. You've been the strong silent type over there for a little bit. I have a very personal story behind that particular episode. My grandfather gave me like $20 and said, "Here, go get you something." So I found that episode on VHS. I had never seen it up to that point. And so I watched it. Well, my younger cousin, he's 2 years younger than me, like a brother to me. And he would come over every weekend, and he'd stay the night at my house, and we'd hang out and play with our action figures. And every time he would come over, I would say, "Hey, let's watch The Cure." After about 6 months of this, I still,
he was cured.
I still love the episode, but it got to the point where I was like, "Hey, you know what I want to watch?" And he was like, "No, I don't want to watch The Cure anymore." So that is I could text him right now and say, "Hey, what's your least favorite X-Men episode?" Just because of me, The Cure.
The Cure.
I actually,
The Cure.
Yeah, very much. So I want to hear for you, Nick. His name's Nick. I want you to tell him a little bit about kind of firsthand what went into that, just so I can say, "Ha ha."
There you go.
Well, that's a tough question because it's been so long since we wrote it that I really don't remember much about it.
Well, that's
sadly.
Probably a blessing to him.
And I didn't watch it nearly as many times as you did, so I've seen it once or twice, but not nearly as many times as you did.
So, okay, but hey, bullet dodged, I guess.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about that episode, though, is that we had, when we sent over a production overseas to Korea, it was like one main studio called ACOM, and then they had like three other production companies, and so one company would get episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would rotate like that. And with The Cure, we got one of the better studios because the production values were really high. It's something that when you do shows, like a producer, you can see, oh, this isn't one of the studios. This is like one of the better ones. And that episode, The Cure, had really good artwork, strong anatomy, and great timing. So that was actually one of the better animated shows for the first season.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought of something I could.
Oh, there we go.
I'm just slow. It took me a minute. What was nice about The Cure is that it of course, being a mutant is just about being different. It's not, a disease that could be cured. And just to do a show like The Cure that's an allegory about if you're unusual, would you like the chance to be like everybody else?
Yeah.
Or is it better just to be yourself and to be who you are? And that was why people responded to that episode and to the whole show for that reason, because it ties into that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was like the first instance of that particular type story. It's the first one I remember. They really kind of took that concept and ran with it in the third X-Men movie. To an extent,
Oh.
A cure for the mutant
Oh, yeah, that's
gene.
right.
So yeah, that was actually kind of neat because they ended up it was borrowed, I guess, the concept.
Right.
They weren't making them into slaves of apocalypse or anything.
Yeah.
But that was actually, that was the scene in Come the Apocalypse where they had Angel strapped down to the table and he's getting hit with a laser and he's screaming and Apocalypse is standing there like, ha ha ha. That was for a 10-year-old, that was serious business,
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that was, even by that time, the older comic where that had happened was already kind of a hot back issue, and so me being the 9-year-old me didn't have a chance to read it. So that was my first exposure to the transformation of Angel into Archangel. And I'm going to point the mic at you, Julia.
Ooh, okay.
I'm not going to say spoiler alert because this is going to be going out tonight.
Okay.
This is going to be going out Sunday night, so our panel will have already passed. But just kind of letting everybody know, I don't want to let anybody down or anything, but during our ranking of the...
Wait, Mark's sitting right there. Mark's sitting right there. The ranking of the top 12,
Yes,
13?
13.
Okay.
Let's go down here right now, Mark.
We will.
Now.
We ranked, or I ranked, Amber and I'm sure Ashley did their own rankings. But I personally ranked, we basically did the season 1 episodes, 13 to number 1, and we're going to be doing our panel at 3 o'clock here at Metrotham Con. And I ranked number 1, Days of Future Past Part 1. And when I said that at the table the other day, Julia just lost her mind and was like, hey. So I do. I want to. I'm sure you have some thoughts on Days of Future Past. I would love to hear some of the.
Well, for folks who are fans of, and who wouldn't have been a fan of the original book, Days of Future Past, with Kitty Pryde, part of the challenge was coming up with a way to tell that story without using Kitty Pryde and without using the sending back in time of the spirit, as opposed to physically sending someone back in time. And I think for the first 13, that was the introduction of time travel as a device in the show. But then not using Kitty Pryde, but then who then do you send back? And then the idea of Bishop becoming what was the Kitty Pryde character from the book, it adds a whole different level to the show in terms of Bishop returning to that time, not knowing anybody, meeting the X-Men and figuring out what's going on, trying to figure it out. The most awkward moment in that, and it still haunts me to this day, but Bishop's on a bus, he's confused, he doesn't know what's going on, he's trying to remember why he's there, and there are 2 young gals who have a new video game called Assassin, and I'm going, oh jeez. But that moment is like, no, he's got to get his memory jogged. You got to come up, and it's, oh God. Sydney Iwander and I, who was an executive, kind of argued about that point, saying this is a little heavy-handed, but yeah, but it jogged his mind. It reminded him, but he wasn't there to be an assassin or stop the assassin.
Right. Well, it's just from an overview point, as Mark and I were trying to make this a 13-episode arc that fit together. This was kind of a challenge because we'd set up the problem of the Sentinels and the problem of the humans dealing with mutants through the Sentinels as the arc that went through 13 of them, and we touch on that in every episode. Well, this was one thing that Marvel called and said, well, we've got this wonderful thing, Days of Future Past. Can you fit it in your arc? And so the fact that Sentinels did play a big part at least in our Days of Future Past, and there's even a futuristic Sentinel, Nimrod, that kind of was almost the only connection. But it was kind of a step away from the 13 that we were telling, because suddenly there's time travel and all this other stuff going on, and the main focus was really on something else, on this other story. But so for Mark and me, it was tying this into the other 11 episodes was the challenge, and it seemed to be pretty seamless. Fans didn't seem to think, oh well, that's different, that's out of place.
And I got to hand it over to Larry, that opening sequence with the destroyed DC and the Statue of Liberty. Yeah. Also, walking past the tombstones, Larry.
That was you?
That was me.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Basically, in that opening sequence, actually, Will Mineo wanted to do that, so he drew that entire opening sequence with the Sentinels and the Statue of Liberty. He said, "I want to get that part," so he did all the opening of that part. But it was all the other graphics I tried to put in, like the tombstones. I deliberately went to the comic books and tried to mimic what was there, and the dates and stuff to try and be as accurate as I could, because that was like one of their best stories that they did in the X-Men. It's like I did as much as I could to match what was in the books and put it into the story. And you guys were talking a second ago. I remember putting, either I wrote it or you guys put it in. It was like a visual gag of Bishop trying to find assassin, and you see this guy get on a bus with this gigantic gun, and then you cut to the outside and you see the doors close for a second. Then it opens and they're jumping out windows and doors. They're screaming and getting out the way, and then he just drives the bus toward the X-Men mansion. It was like a little comedic moment.
He doesn't play around when he's driving that bus either. He
No.
can drive it right through the front door.
He said, "I'm coming in," and but yeah, I tried to, as best I could, grab the graphics of the original Days of Future Past, and so it's at least a touchstone to what was originally intended. It wasn't an exact representation, but a lot of what we did was we tried to keep the spirit of the original. But when you're talking about a printed material and you're talking about film, you have to adapt it because it's moving. It's not like a snapshot of action like in the comic books. But for all of us here, it's like we tried to take what was in the books and put it in the film, and we tried to not change it unless we had to, and that was our philosophy.
Oh, I'll tell you, Jubilee is my favorite character, evidenced by the shirt I have on here.
Yeah.
And I had that came to be about halfway through season 1 for me. I think Slave Island was probably the spark that, because she was trying to lead the rebellion. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We're going to get to that in a second. So, because she was like, "Oh, I'm going to help out," and Gambit's like, "No, you're not gonna. We just need to stay here." And there was a plan all along, but Jubilee was really just kind of taking the bull by the horns and wanting to lead a rebellion.
Yeah.
And so at that point, Jubilee, I was like, you know what? And then I went back and rewatched some of the early episodes, and I love Jubilee.
Yeah.
And then in Days of Future Past, when they scan across the tombstones, and then they focus on Jubilee,
Yes.
and they just kind of rest there. I was like, that's like a middle finger to me. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. It's like, Cyclops, Rogue, da-da-da-da-da, Jubilee.
I think she died first.
And she died first.
And she died first, obviously. And
Yeah.
I think I had a friend of mine point that out. She was the first to die. She's the weakest. I was like, man, get out of here. So, Slave Island, I was going to talk about it and the Unstoppable Juggernaut.
Okay.
And I had forgotten all about it, but I was reading that Wizard magazine that I showed you guys earlier, and they actually mentioned that the Unstoppable Juggernaut originally was broadcast out of order, and the ending to Slave Island, the original ending, did not have the mansion destroyed. The first airing. But was that just a bother, or?
The original ending, I don't recall.
Well, they.
If I could real quick on that. We didn't really have any control over how they were aired, and there were teething problems first season, and just getting animation takes so long to get right that I could see them, do them out of order like that, and that would have been a last second decision by the network to leave that bit of ending off. I hadn't heard about that order problem, but I can see if you're going to play it out of order, you don't want to destroy the mansion and then have the mansion just magically be there again the next time without an explanation of what happened. But it was supposed to connect. That was the cliffhanger. Okay, who did this? Yeah. And that was set up the whole question about the next episode. Is it this massive creature or is it this massive creature that did it? And so that's a shame, but I assume it got back in order eventually.
That was the thing is, the DVD release, everything's good, and every other mention. And honestly, I think if it wasn't for the mention in that Wizard magazine that I have, it would probably be lost to time.
Yeah.
Nobody would have remembered it. But I'll show that to y'all after the interview. It's kind of neat that they actually have the Unstoppable Juggernaut on the list as like episode 10 instead of episode 8. But it actually says 8, but it's listed 10th, and it's crazy how they did it. So Slave Island.
That's here.
That was it was kind of funny because they lead up to it in the episode Cold Vengeance, and they're kind of teasing Genosha. There's this mutant-friendly island, and then they show up at the end, and it's funny. Ashley and I were watching it the other day. First time she'd ever seen the cartoon, and she was like, "I have the feeling that island is not what it seems," and I was like, "Yeah." And sure enough, right there at the end. They're attacked by all of the robots, and then the Sentinel pops up right at the end.
Yeah.
And in Slave Island, we get to see all kinds of cameos, all these different mutants that we've never seen: Sunfire, Mystique, the Blob.
That was me.
Yeah, and I sat in on y'all's panel yesterday when you were talking. I was really, really on that. So we see all these cameos. We get to see Cable for the first time, which was really cool, and he plays into the series later. So I want to hear, because I think the story was Extinction Agenda was what it was loosely based off of, where they were all captured and made into labor slaves and things like that. I want to hear some background on Slave Island, and I do, because it's one of the cooler stories that featured a lot of characters that you don't normally get to see.
Got to pull it out of
I could make something up, but I really don't remember. And I don't know that we had ever read any, the Extinction. Yeah, we weren't fans of the comic books, so we weren't familiar with the Extinction Agenda thing you're talking about. It was probably just. Probably just ask Larry or Will or somebody. Well, they ever done one? Where people were.
Where were they being enslaved? Oh, Genosha. Okay. So
yeah. And it was so valuable to have a couple of guys who were big fans of the comic books and who knew all the details, because we wanted it to be true to the comic books and to connect and to do something that all the fans would like, and we might have been much less successful at that without them telling us.
It was great synergy because these guys. It was great synergy because the writing staff, they created great character stories and character arcs, even though they may not have known all the minutia that was stuck in my head, and that's what made some great stories. And so once I got the scripts, I was able to make it like a comic book, like the Marvel comic books, all the details, and make it just like the comic books. Now, one of the things that happened in his story, which helped me out quite a bit in the series, is that he wrote mutants, like Mutant 1, other than the regular cast people. He wrote Mutant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as people, background characters. And so I went home. This is no internet. I went home, brought my X-Men collection to work, put it on a Xerox machine, and then I told the staff, okay, make this Blob, make this Mystique, make this Sunfire, make this North Star. And I populated it with Marvel characters, but I kept them the same names that he had. Yeah. So they're always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so by doing so, what I discovered was that I sent it into the system. Nobody said a peep about using Marvel characters that they had not authorized. And from that point forward, I knew how to put cameos into the series based upon his script. And that's how you got all those cameos in other places and other scripts. It was based upon what I discovered, that the people who were working there knew nothing about the X-Men. And so, okay, cool. I know how to work the system now.
So, yeah, there were, it was so cool because this is, way back when, now it's nothing. People there's little Easter eggs, cameos and stuff. But X-Men the Animated Series was one of those, it was a pioneer in that respect. And people who read the comics on a regular basis, you'd be sitting there just watching an episode, and like specifically Days of Future Past Part 2, where they're scanning Gambit's memory,
Yeah.
and his wife from like one of the early
Belladonna.
yeah, Belladonna,
Yeah.
she popped up for a second, and then Ghost Rider popped up, and I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, where did he come from? And it just made me think, what has Gambit been up to that he's seeing, you know? And then I started wanting to, you know, oh, we might see Ghost Rider later, and it just gave a lot of hope for what we might see.
Yeah.
And they did. Y'all tackled Gambit's story with Belladonna in
Yes.
season 2.
Yes.
It was Externally Yours, I
Yeah.
think, was the
Yes.
episode.
Yes.
So that we've been concentrating really heavy on season 1 because that's kind of what's on my mind. But there were a ton of good stories, like the Phoenix Saga, and then the Dark Phoenix Saga, and then even in the later episodes, you know, y'all tackled the classic Wolverine stuff with Captain America. That was in the last season that
Right.
a lot of people don't remember, but that was like a hidden gem that was really fun.
Yeah.
And you know, I think they kind of even borrowed from like the Age of Apocalypse in a way. There was a story where
Oh yeah.
Storm had the Mohawk, and her and Wolverine were a couple.
I'd love to talk to you about
One
that.
man's worth.
Right,
Yes.
because we spent the first couple years finding some of the best stories in the books and using bits and pieces of them, but this is actually the reverse. People remember the Age of Apocalypse as this great run of comic books. It actually came 2 years after our show episode. Marvel, Bob Harris was our advisor, and he liked that story so much that he then a year later had his team start laying out Age of Apocalypse based, in effect, it was called One Man's Worth, and it was a real simple basic story that I always say how much I love it, because it's when we get a story, you know, that illuminates why the X-Men exist. This is, well, what if Xavier had been killed, and there were never an X-Men, what would the world be like? And it's such a simple concept. It makes you think about who the X-Men are, why you're watching them, why you care about them, and yet it sets up this fun personal story for the characters to go back and forth, and sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. But that was, you know, Bob told us. I mean, so you guys came up with my favorite story that you've come up with in the series that we haven't done anything like this, and then they did Age of Apocalypse based on it.
There was I could normally just rattle off the titles of the episodes. There was a 4 or 5 part story where Apocalypse was going through time and collecting different.
Beyond Good and Evil.
Yes, Beyond Good and Evil, and that was like the big Cable versus Apocalypse. They the comics later in like the year 99 and 2000 borrowed so heavily from that story, because they did a story called Apocalypse the 12.
Oh, okay.
Where he collected 12 of the most powerful beings in Marvel and was going to utilize them as like a conduit to go into another body, which is yet another story borrowed from X-Men, because they was going to do that to My Girl Jubilee. So I mean that's cool. Like, how does that make you guys feel to know that you were the pioneers on some of the most influential stories? Like, you know, y'all borrowed in the beginning from influential stories in Marvel, and then later Marvel and the writers borrowed from you guys.
Yeah.
So I mean that's got to be a special feeling.
Yeah, well, it just made us feel like we found that we'd done this right, that we'd set up something that was within their universe and that was genuine, and that we hadn't tried to make up something, you know, random on our own. That, oh well, these are fun characters. Let's change this all around for, you know, just for fun. We wanted to respect what, you know, the world that they created, specifically. And you'll notice if you know all the books from about 1975 on, when the X-Men came back after they'd been the younger characters in the 60s with Stan and Jack Kirby, And then when the book failed and they came back in the mid-'70s with Len Wein and Claremont and Byrne, suddenly they were older, more sophisticated. I think it was Vietnam had just ended. I'm not sure why, but there was an older, darker, more serious adult tone to the books, and I probably 90% of what we took was from 75 to 90 from that section, and that was, and just give credit to those folks that we think took the books to another level.
I'm gonna put everybody on the spot here. Over the course, 76 episodes. I don't want to make you pick your favorite children. Favorite episode of the entire series for each of you.
We'll do it.
I was involved early on in what became Beauty and the Beast, with the story there that Beast falls in love with a girl who's blind, and she regains his sight, and they find love together but aren't able to be together because of those darn friends of humanity that are forcing them apart. But I just, the romantic in me and the romantic in Beast, I've always enjoyed that story especially.
Yeah. I think the pilot was the most important story because we set up the series, and that's always the hardest thing to do in a series. But the one that I think, it's back to One Man's Worth, that you go through 76 of them, and 7 or 8 of them are just things that the story crystallized beautifully. It's just something that okay, this is a perfect story for the X-Men. They don't come very often to all of us, no matter how hard we try. And that one for me was the one that I think I always say is my favorite.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. No. God, it's kind of hard to pick out of all of them, because I had 2 of them at the top, and one is the Rogue's Tale, and the other one was Time Fugitives. And with Rogue's Tale, what I liked about it a lot was that it finally gave us an origin of how Rogue got her powers and how she was so super strong, and it's a very tragic backstory when you find out. And for me as a fanboy, it's like I got a chance to draw Ms. Marvel, which is now Captain Marvel. And just had a lot of fun, but it was a very tragic backstory that people really relate to of the character. And the other one for me was Time Fugitives, and it's because it was more fun. It was a fun episode to see Cable and Bishop go at each other. These 2 badasses that just got these 2 giant guns just trying to blow each other up. Yep. It was just fun, So. Hers being more of a tragedy, and Time Fugitives being like a lot of fun boy action, shoot 'em up.
A Rogue's Tale, that is one of those that, thanks to the internet and thanks to the new Captain Marvel movie, it's found new life.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of neat that people are going back and rewatching that. So.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say that I feel kind of envious in a way, because the people are bringing up these really great standalone kind of episodes where there was something really special going on, like the Beauty and the Beast, or the Rogue's Tale, or the One Man's Worth, or something like that. And I missed out on a lot of that, on the opportunity to write those, because after the first season was done, Fox and Marvel, nobody knew whether it was going to work or not. Nobody knew it was going to be a big hit. And so none of us, it wasn't like a live action series where they sign all the actors to 5-year contracts. Yeah. We did 13, and then we're off onto something else. They let us go. And, by the time they're actually animated and recorded and everything and put on the air, we've been working on something else for a long time. So Eric went on and was story editing the Exo Squad. And I and my brother Michael were both writing a lot of episodes for that. And then by the time they were doing the later seasons of X-Men, Eric had gone back to story edit X-Men, and my brother Michael took over story editing Exo Squad, and I was doing an enormous amount of writing for that. I think for the second 39 episodes of Exo Squad, I think I wrote pretty much every outline. So I was writing like 2 outlines a week. I was just doing the whole story for that. And so I really didn't have a chance to do too many in the later seasons. I worked on both the Phoenix stories, and setting those up. And I really liked the Phoenix story. But as far as my favorite X-Men episode, it's going to have to come from season 1, and we kind of treated that not as this is going to be a great episode, but how is this going to serve that arc that we've set up for the whole 13. So, but I like killing Morph, so the 2-part pilot would probably be my favorite, just because that was such a kind of a shock to a cartoon audience to have a character that everybody liked and then he's dead.
Yeah. And the thing is with that, the first 2-part, it set the tone for the rest of the series. People realize that we're not doing Super Friends, we're not doing Scooby-Doo. We're trying to do something different here. And the 2-parter with the Sentinels, it's like everybody remembers that. It's like, wow. And they knew they were getting something special watching this show. And what Mark said was also true, is that when we were doing this show, we never got like, oh, you got a 4 year, here's a 4-year contract, you're going to be around for a long time. It's not like we got 13 episodes and then kick to the curb. Okay. And we didn't know where once you did the 13, you didn't know if you had a job. And a lot of us, had to find other work, put our resumes out. We were like, season to season to season. For almost every year, we never got a guarantee. Like, it would have been great to offer these guys 2 or 3 year contracts, and then they could really plan their lives and plan the stories better. Because what I like to do was, work with the writers and figure out their story arcs, and so I could plant seeds along the way to make the shows set up something ahead of time of what they were doing. But that was not to be the case. But anyway, everything still turned out okay. But that would have been nice,
Next time.
Yeah. I'll say, like, we were ranking the 13 episodes of season 1. My personal favorite is the first episode of Time Fugitives because the ending did it for me. Because the X-Men were like running from apocalypse. He grows to like the size of a 10-story building and kills every one of them.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, wait, that's not supposed. Yeah, I mean, we had seen a bad.
I made that up.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
They're fried skeletons.
Fried skeletons. I made it up.
Because what happened, we knew that the X-Men had a bad future ahead, and that was evidenced by Days of Future Past Part 1.
Yeah.
But we never actually got to see that happen.
Yeah.
And when Apocalypse, you think, the X-Men are going to get away, to be continued, blah blah blah. But no, he kills them. He's like, X-Men, and they turn around and he's just, phew, and it fries everybody.
Yep.
And then Cable's like, oh my God, they died.
We need a little time travel to fix that.
Yeah. And I was sitting there thinking, like, and it was such a high energy, finale to be continued. And he was like, oh, I've got to go back in time and help Apocalypse, destroy the world. And I'm like, how is this going to resolve? I mean, now, I know, but man, when that animation wise is probably one of my favorite all-time cliffhangers.
Yeah.
So kudos to you on that one.
Yeah, I wanted to show that there was Apocalypse is like the one villain, at least in the 90s when we were doing the show. He's the one villain they can't beat. He's so damn powerful. So in Part 1, he pisses them off so bad, he just goes up and kills them, wipes them out. So that in Part 2, he just gets a little pissed off, and he just floats away. So it was like just a little bit changing the tone, but because of, I think in Part 2 it was Wolverine develops the vaccine, the antibodies for his disease, and it's like, oh shit, they stopped making it. Sorry, and he floats away. Okay. And so it was just it was a change in tone of Apocalypse. And so he said, okay, he just goes off somewhere. But I wanted to show that in Part 1, what would happen if you really got pissed off at everybody. And so that's where it came from.
I want to talk about the man behind the voice of Apocalypse real quick.
Okay.
The definitive Apocalypse for basically everybody. He hasn't been done, in my opinion, he hasn't totally been done correctly since the animated series. And the show is full of voices that even after the movies, even after various other animated incarnations of X-Men, when I read a comic, I still hear these voices. So the late voice actor who did Apocalypse, who would be best to talk about him?
Okay, I think here, John. I mean, this is a bit of a personal story as we kind of wrap up here. But John, the gentleman's name is John Colicos, and he died 2007. So never had a chance to really tell him how much we appreciated his voice, because every fan I've ever met loves the I am the Rock.
It's iconic.
He's amazing, and the thing that was for us, Mark and his brother Michael and Julia and I all were big original Star Trek fans from the time we were little. So that was a show for us when we were young. And what we didn't realize when we were doing the show was this same guy was the very first Klingon on that ever appeared on Star Trek. He was a commander in Balance of Terror. He and Kirk are stuck on this planet with seemingly peaceful people that they're disdainful of, and Klingon is going to destroy Spock. He's going to turn his mind into a vegetable. And this guy's voice, with his mind scanner, and this guy's voice just stayed with me for 50 years. And then to wake up one day and find out, oh, that was our Apocalypse. The same man it was geek heaven. So that was a gift to us. I mean, the entire cast was a gift to us, because you may know the story. It was such a different kind of show that the first time they tried to record it, they made it sound cartoony, and we all freaked out and thought, no, this needs to be serious adult stuff. So Larry and a bunch of people went up to Toronto, and they spent a couple weeks searching the entire Toronto theatrical community for voices with gravitas that could be serious adult characters in a serious adult drama or even a tragedy, and that made the cast sound really distinctive. And if it weren't for us screwing up the first pass and not getting across what we wanted, I don't think we would have worked quite so hard to get the perfect cast.
I think because you could go on YouTube right now, and there is like greatest hits of Apocalypse, and it's just one little speech or one-liner after another of Apocalypse from the animated series saying all these cool things, and it's like you could just sit there and just watch it. And it's like, you know what, that was awesome, because the voice, the writing, everything was just absolutely cool. Before we wrap, y'all, I do want to talk about your book.
Yes.
I'm going to be doing a review on this book in the next few weeks.
Write the book.
Yeah. Previously on X-Men, this thing looks like. Oh, I want to ask you one thing. I was reading this book earlier today, and you talked about whenever you first started the show, you had it was like a couple 100-page X-Men Bible. Does that still exist somewhere?
Well, actually, it should have been a couple 100-page X-Men Bible, but we were dropped in the deep end real fast. We were a couple months behind before we started. So what we usually do for a show of this importance is we write 70, 80, 90 pages of text and have lots of artwork and have the whole world set out and a dozen stories laid out. And we had to do this so fast that over a couple days, I wrote up about a 20-page thing I called Notes to a Bible, and because I was too embarrassed to call it a full Bible, and more to come. Footnotes. And so I did that, and Larry and Will frantically drew up the characters and drew a couple backgrounds and just tossed them at people and said, okay, we got to get this done now. And Mark wrote the pilot in about 10 days. The whole thing. Yeah, I know. Did that feel like it, does it? And we laid out the first 13 episodes in about 2 weeks, and so there was an urgency to it. And the downside of that is obviously you don't have time for second thoughts and polishing, but the upside is you don't have time for second thoughts and polishing, and you don't have time for 30 other people to weigh in and say, well, that's an interesting way to look at the X-Men, but what if you changed all this stuff around? We just don't have time for that. That's going to production next episode now. So it was the urgency was a gift, but we had to have the confidence that just got a week to develop this. fine, cool, we can do it. Let's run with it. And that it was that way, really. I do have the notes to a Bible on file, but it's, as I say, it's not something I'm proud to show to the world because it's so short and so incomplete.
It's funny because I was reading, and from the time the X-Men, the first meeting where the X-Men was just an idea, was February 17th, 1992.
Right.
The first episode went to air Halloween, 1992, just over 9 months. So it had the kind of the gestation period of a human. You know?
Right. It did. Matter of fact, I mean, not to get too weird about this, but our second son was born in October of that year. So when we got the job in February, Julia was pregnant with Alec, and he popped out about 3 weeks before the show premiered. So there was a gestation going on as well.
That is amazing. I remember you saying something during the panel about being pregnant at some point. I remember.
Oh, and Mark's wife Amy.
Right. Well, yeah, but between the two families, we had 4 kids within about three years, right about this time, right while all this was happening.
I love it. Okay, you can pick this up on Amazon. By the time this goes to air, people won't be able to pick it up at MetrothemCon, but yeah, it's an awesome book. It has a full filmography, your thoughts, interviews with like all the cast that you could get a hold of, everybody that's living basically. Yeah, behind the scenes, all kinds of stuff. And I'm not gonna talk about it, but there is like a little snippet in there of where y'all kind of had to go back and forth with Stan Lee about some of the stuff early in the series. So that's entertaining. Not gonna spoil that. It's worth the read. Check it out. So yeah, previously on X-Men, check it out on Amazon, and I've read about 20 pages so far. My personal seal of approval. So what do we?
That we are available to talk to you more about the book. We are at X-Men TAS, which is for the animated series, xmentas.com with our blog, then X-Men TAS on Twitter, which we're on quite a bit. X-Men TAS on Instagram, and we have a page previously on X-Men on Facebook. So please find us.
Awesome. And I want to say, like, again, I know people haven't said it enough. Thank you all for not only being here, but for appearing on the channel, and just for being here at MetrothemCon, because this is something special to have this many people from our favorite childhood cartoon to be able to be here, and you guys, again, thank you for being so approachable and for talking to everyone, and it really is, it's awesome to be able to, the people who were behind your favorite cartoons as a child, to be able, I'm 35 now, and for me to be able to come up to y'all and be like, hey, can we talk about the cartoon? And y'all like, yeah, let's chat. That's cool. Really, it's really neat. So I'm going to stop before I go getting all emotional. All right. But again, thank you, Mark, Larry, Eric, Julia. Thank you very much for coming on and talking to me today. This is day 3 of MetrothemCon. By the time you guys see this, the show's going to be over, but we will be doing it again next year. So you've seen by watching all of our programming this weekend just how cool this show has been. It has. It's been a blast. I hope you all have enjoyed Chattanooga.
Sure have.
So, again, I'm Lonnie with Untitled Nerd Network, brought to you by Infinity Flux. Go check them out up in Hickson, right on Hickson Pike, right across from Rice Box. Pick you up from Chinese while you're there. And this has been our kind of roundtable discussion with the creators of X-Men, the animated series. Thanks for watching, and we'll actually see everybody tonight for our live recap of The Walking Dead.
All right. See you later.
We'll try to end that. It won't stop. There we go.